guest and whom he 35 Articles of the Strategy or Military Law by Miyamoto Musashi. In 1641, Miyamoto Musashi wrote down the essentials of his sword fighting school in 36 articles and presented them to Hosokawa Tadatoshi, the feudal lord of Kumamoto, where he had lived as guest and whom he had instructed his martial art. 35 Articles of Strategy or Military Law was regarded as a draft or even abstract of the Book of Five Rings or Gorin-nosho. However, the document was recently discovered that confirmed the historical fact that Musashi really wrote this text. 1. Name this way of strategy as two swords. This strategy is named as two swords, and the situation of having two swords is meaningless to the left. This is to get used to holding a sword with one hand. The advantage of having one hand is when you are in the army, on horseback, along the river, along the narrow path, stone road, crowded, or running. If you have a weapon or tool in your left hand and you can't hold it with both hands, you have to take a sword with one hand. Taking a sword with one hand feels heavy at first, but once you get used to it, you can do whatever you want. For example, if you are skilled in shooting a bow, you have a strong power, and if you can ride a horse, you have that power. As a common skill, the captain has the power if he uses a paddle or paddle. Farmers have a strong power if they use plows and hoe. If you practice a sword, you will be able to achieve that power. However, weakness and strength vary from person to person, so each person should have his or her appropriate sword. 2. The way of military art strategy. This strategy way is the same, from large group military art to single person military art. If you compare it with the one military art I'm writing, the head is a general, the limbs are a vassal, and the torso is infantry. If you think that way and try to rule the country and train yourself, it is the same in the military art strategy, regardless of size. The aim of the military art strategy is to arrange everything, to make it evenly conscious from the head to the soles of the feet, without any excess, lack, strength, weakness, and even finish. Is there? 3. How to handle a sword. To hold and handle the sword, lift your thumb and index finger and tighten your long, high middle finger, ring finger, and little finger. There are times when you say, live, or die, in your sword or in your hand. A hand that has no intention of cutting when holding, receiving, or fastening a sword is said to be dead. Living means being a natural body so that you can easily meet your sword and cut it without becoming stiff. It is called a living hand. The wrists should not get entangled, the elbows should not stretch too much, the arms should not bend too much, the upper muscles of the arms should be weak, and the lower muscles should be strong. Make sure to check it thoroughly. 4. Posture. As for posture, the face does not look down, does not turn too much, does not stretch shoulders, does not lose balance, does not stick out the chest, sticks out, does not bend the waist, does not stiffen the knees, straightens the body, and be wide. Make yourself look bigger and bigger. By always taking that posture, it becomes a natural posture. You should try to take that attitude on a regular basis. 5. Footing. The way to walk is to always walk, although there are large and small stride lengths and slow and fast steps at that time. What you should avoid when using your feet is running, unstable, over-tensioning, weak, delayed, or ahead. All of these should be avoided. No matter how unstable your footing is, you have to step firmly on the ground so that it doesn't matter. Learn more carefully than writing after this. 6. How to use your eyeballs. I used to try various things about how to turn my eyes, but now I think that the direction of my eyes is almost toward the other person's face. And I try to narrow my eyes a little more than usual to see clearly. The eyeballs do not move, and the eyes look far away, no matter how close or how close the enemy is. From such an eye, you can see not only the enemy's skill but also the left and right sides. By having a wide field of view, you can see the whole, and you can react flexibly no matter how the enemy moves. If the view of an object is kan or ken, the kan that looks at the whole should be strong, and the ken that focuses on the object should be weak. The will is something that happens to the eyes, not something that appears in things. You should know it well and practice it well. 7. Timing. There will be different ways to take the time, but for now, I'm talking about military art, and I'll leave the other way for now. No matter what the way, if you enter that way, you will know the appropriate time for each field. While the sword is hit by a person, the opponent's sword is also hitting himself. When you try to defeat a person, you forget it. You have to understand it and devise it well. 8. Things to keep in mind. Keep your mind open, don't be discouraged, don't rush, don't plan, don't be afraid, don't hold yourself. The mind of will is light, the mind of heart is heavy, and the mind is kept undisturbed and unwavering like water, and at any given time, it faces the enemy, or something sudden and unexpected happens. Respond even when it happens. There is a change in water and mind, sometimes a drop of water, and sometimes as broad as the sea, calm and tolerant. Always keep track of your mental state and devise ways to deal with it from time to time. 9. Knowing the upper, middle, and lower stances in military strategy art. There is a stance in military strategy art. There are various stances on the sword, and there are ways to fight that look strong or fast, but you have to know that it is the lower tier in terms of stanchek. In addition, there are some military strategy arts that are delicate, show the skill of small hands, have a good tempo, and look flashy and excellent, but this is the middle stance. The military art that is positioned in the upper stance is neither strong nor weak, not stubborn, fast, or superior. It can be said that the military strategy art that does not look unsightly and looks large, straight, and quiet is the upper stance. You should carefully examine how you are now. 10. Thread and square scale. You should have a thread and a steel square in your heart, whether in normal times, against an enemy, or with a sword. When you put a thread on the other person's heart, there are places where the thread is stretched strongly and weakly, where the thread is straight and distorted, and where the thread is stretched and slack. You can understand the other person's heart by straightening the square scale in your heart and applying it to the thread. With that square, you can see round and square, long and short, distorted and straight. Find out what the thread and square scale are for you, that is, how to analyze the other person, and devise a way to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the other person. 11. The way of sword or tachi. If you don't know the path to swing a sword, you can't swing it as you wish. Besides, it cannot be shaken strongly. You cannot cut the opponent without knowing the back of the sword and the side of the sword. If you use a sword like a small sword, let alone treat it like a spatula, you will not have a feeling for the enemy. You should always know the path of the sword, make the sword quiet by the weight of the sword, and train it so that it hits the enemy well. 12. Difference between hit and meet. About hit and meet. No matter what kind of sword you use, you should firmly decide where you want to hit, and swing as if you were cutting a trowel. Meet means that even if a certain place is not decided, it will hit something. There are also cases where meet are strongly hit, but that is not the same as hit. It doesn't matter if the sword meets the enemy's body, meets the enemy's sword, or misses the hit. The reason why I can't hit it as I want and just meet it is because I'm not in a state of mind like things to keep in mind mentioned in 8, and I'm upset. Please devise that point well. 13. 3 kinds of sen or first move. There are 3 first moves in military strategy art. The first is the first move when you hit the opponent first. The second is the first move when the enemy hits first. The third is the first move when both you and the enemy hit at the same time. At the first move, when you hit first, the body hits with the sword, but leaves the legs and heart, and moves the enemy's heart without loosening or being too tense. When the enemy hits you first, you should put your heart into your body, and when you are in time with the enemy, you should take the initiative as it is according to the movement of the enemy. When you and your enemy hit at the same time, you should strengthen yourself and take the initiative with your sword, body, legs, and mind. In military strategy art, nothing is more important than taking the first move. 14. To pass over when confront a serious situation. If you think that both the enemy and yourself will hit each other's swords and hit your sword to confront a serious situation, you should stick your body and legs together to the enemy's body. Once you pass over it, you won't have to worry about it. This should be considered after reading the later notes. 15. The body that replaces the sword. When launching a sword, the body does not move at the same time. When you try to hit an enemy, your body follows you. The sword, body and mind are not launched together. The heart inside, the body inside. This should be considered carefully. 16. 2 legs. 2 legs means that you carry 2 steps while hitting one sword. Riding on a sword, removing it, connecting and pulling it, it means carrying 2 legs. If you hit one sword and go 1 foot at a time, your body will stop moving and you will not be free. To carry 2 legs means to use the legs as if walking at all times. This should be well devised. 17. Stepping on the sword. It is hard to step on the tip of the enemy's sword. It is my heart to step on the tip of the sword that the enemy hits with my left foot. When trampling, you can win in any way, whether it's a sword, body, or mind, if you set it first. Without this mind, it wouldn't work as a flutter. The legs may be loose. Stepping on the sword is not something that happens many times. This should be well devised. 18. To hold down the shade. If you look at the shade of the enemy, which means the invisible parts and movements of the enemy. There are places where the enemy has a surplus of mind, that is where the enemy is strongly prepared, and places where the enemy is lacking in mind, that is where the enemy is weak and poorly prepared. If you pay attention to the part of your mind and attack the part that reflects the lack of mind, the enemy will lose your position and timing, and you can easily win. However, it is important to leave your heart and fully identify the part to attack. This should be well devised. 19. Moving the shadow. A shadow is the shadow of the sun, a visible movement. When the enemy holds the sword invisible and holds the body forward, hold down the enemy's sword that cannot see the heart, make the body natural. And hit the place where there are signs of enemy movement with my sword. If so, the enemy's body will surely start moving. If the enemy starts moving, it's easy to win. I didn't do that before. Now, I hate sticking to my heart, and I see signs of enemy movement and hit it. Try to devise it well. 20. Removing the strings. A string is a bowstring, a vine. Removing the strings is a remedy when both the enemy and myself are pulling strongly against each other. The body, the sword, the legs, the mind, the strong pulling relationship is to be quickly removed. It's an unexpected move for the enemy, so you can remove it well. It should be devised. 21. The heart of the small comb. The heart of the small comb is to release the connected and sticking state. With the comb in my heart, I am trying to solve the state of being connected and sticking to the enemy according to that state. At first glance, the state of being connected to the enemy and sticking to each other and the state of pulling each other are similar, but they are different. It is a strong heart that pulls each other, and a weak heart that is connected and sticking together. You should think deeply. 22. Knowing the time signature. Knowing the time signature means that some enemies have fast movements and some slow movements, and the time signature follows the enemy's movements. For slow-hearted enemies, do not move yourself, do not give any signs of sword movement, and hit them quickly. This is a beat. When the enemy's movement is fast, hit yourself and your heart first, and then hit with a sword after the enemy moves. This is second hit. Remorse is to hit the body as if to hit it, leaving the mind and body behind, and hitting the enemy's mind strongly without showing any signs of movement. In addition, the delayed time signature means that when the enemy pays with a sword and tries to receive it, the movement is slowed down and the time signature is shifted to strike between the enemy's movements. It should be devised well. 23. Pillow holder. Holding the pillow means holding down the head of the H character that the enemy is trying to hit, in response to the sign that the enemy is trying to hit the sword. The way to hold it is to hold it with your mind, body, or sword. Knowing the signs of enemy movement is good for hitting the enemy, entering the enemy, removing the enemy's attack, and hitting first. Holding the pillow is important in any of these cases. It should be well trained. 24. Knowing the state of mind or keiki. It is important to know the state of mind or keiki. You should be familiar with whether keiki on the spot or keiki is floating or submerged, shallow or deep, strong or weak. Thread and square scale mentioned in 10 is always the case, but the keiki is immediate. If you can get a good idea of the keiki at that time, you can beat the enemy in any case. You should think deeply. 25. Becoming an enemy. In the battlefield, it is also necessary to think in the position of the enemy. Is the enemy trapped alone, a great enemy, or an excellent martial artist? You should think in the heart of the enemy. If you do not know that the enemy is lost in your mind, you will assume that a weak enemy is a strong enemy, and a person who is not good at martial arts will be regarded as a person who is good at martial arts. In that case, even though the enemy has no advantage, it gives the enemy an advantage. You should judge from the standpoint of the enemy. 26. Holding back and letting go the spirit. Holding back the spirit or letting go the spirit should be used appropriately according to the existing objective as well as the temporal circumstances. While holding the sword, you should usually let go of the outer spirit and hold back the inner spirit. But in the moment when you strike the enemy in earnest, you should let go of the inner spirit and hold back inside the outer spirit. The methods of this holding back or letting go the spirit differ depending on This should be carefully considered. 27. The hit of the edge. The edge is the trigger. When the enemy's sword hits you in the near future, you may be able to stretch or receive it with your sword. Receiving, stretching, and hitting are all actions to get a chance to hit the enemy. Riding, taking off, and taking over are all actions that are taken to hit the enemy. My body, mind, and sword should all focus on striking the enemy. This should be considered carefully. 28. Sticking to use. It is important to bring your body into close with the enemy's body so that lacquer and glue stick to things. You have to keep your feet, hips, and face in close contact. If the body is not in close contact, the enemy can perform various techniques. The time signature of the enemy is the same as that of pillow holding mentioned in 23. It is a time signature that holds down the head of the H character that the enemy is trying to hit. 29. The body of the monkey. Autumn monkey is a monkey with a short hand. When matching with the enemy, you should think that you have no left or right hand and stick to the enemy's body. It is a mistake to put your hands out, not your body. If you put your hand out first, your body will pull. However, the left shoulder and elbow are useful. You shouldn't use your minions. The time signature for the enemy is the same as the previous item. 30. Compared to height. When you attach to the enemy's body, you should try to compare the height with the enemy and stretch your body so that you are taller than the enemy's. The time signature of the enemy is the same as the previous item. You should devise it well. 31. The teaching of the door. When you attach to the enemy's body, you should widen and straighten your body so that it covers both the enemy's sword and body so that there is no gap between the enemy and your body. On the other hand, if you want to shrink, you should keep your body thin and straight, and put your shoulders firmly against the enemy's chest. This allows you to defeat the enemy. You should devise it well. 32. The teaching of a general graduate. If you know the truth of military strategy art, you can consider the enemy as a graduate of an army and you can be considered a general of that army. I don't let the enemy be free at all, I let the enemy swing his sword, shrug the enemy, all at my command. You should not give your enemies any room to devise. This is especially important. 33. Not quite. About holding a sword. No matter what the stance, having the mind to hold it will make the sword and body harden. No matter what the situation, when you hold a sword, you should lose the mind of holding it. The sword stance changes depending on the movement of the enemy. There are 3 variations in the upper row. The same is true for the middle and lower tiers, as well as for the left and right sides. You should think that the stance is in shape, but not. This should be considered carefully. 34. Iwao's body. Iwao's body is a strong and great heart without moving. If you get the hang of it, and if you can't keep up with it, everyone who is alive will have a good heart. Even the innocent vegetation is rooted. If the rain and the breeze are the same, you should carefully examine this. 35. Mark the period. To know the period means to know the early period, to know the late period, to know the lagging period, and to know the unsuccessful period. There is a sword with the secret of being a jikitsu or straight road in the first class. This thing will be a word of mouth. 36. Void. In the unlikely event that something is void or empty, if it is difficult to write, you should devise yourself. The 35 articles on the right are the General Secretary's declarations, from the perspective of military strategy art to the feelings. The place where you leave the monkeys is similar to everyone else. In addition, the familiar oral traditions of the first-class swordsman are not even written. The place of suspicion is Ya who should talk to him.